Okay, we have nearly 80 people, so welcome. I will start very slowly so that people can continue to join and not miss too much. Welcome, so thank you for joining this. My name is Chris Hewitt. I'll be moderating this session. I work at the UK Met Office, where I head up the International Climate Services team, and also the University of Southern Queensland, where I'm a Professor of Climate Science. So this is part of the, I hope you realised yesterday, the European Commission adopted a new EU strategy on adaptation to climate change to set out the pathway to prepare for the unavoidable impacts of climate change. And this session you've joined is one of 3 parallel sessions earlier this afternoon, and there'll be other sessions later this afternoon. So if I go to the next slide, I hope you can see this. Roger, could you put up your thumb if you can see this? Thank you. So our session is on smarter adaptation, improve knowledge and manage uncertainty. So I hope we're all aware and familiar that our understanding of climate change related risks, impacts and vulnerabilities has improved hugely over the past decades. It really has. But obviously now we need to translate this huge wealth of knowledge we already have, and also bring on board new knowledge to develop products that are focused on the users to help them make their decisions, so we can boost the resilience and adaptation capacity of their communities. So that's the background. As I said, there are other parallel sessions, but this particular session here will address these 3 broad themes listed here. So firstly, a theme on co-developing and employing climate services. And clearly the Copernicus Climate Change Service is a key part of the landscape, and there are other parts of this landscape which we may well hear about and discuss. Secondly, digital technologies, building upon advancements in Earth observation and artificial intelligence. And particularly, I think we'll hear about new initiatives like Destination Earth and digital twins. And then thirdly, the importance of climate loss data, collected in cooperation with member states, cities, industry, a range of different actors. Standardising these and making them publicly accessible, for example, through the JRC's Risk Data Hub, and we will be hearing more about this. So that's the session, and on the right, these are our panellists, which I will briefly introduce now, and then we will hear some initial thoughts from each of our panellists shortly, in turn, going through the running order here on the screen, just to warn the panellists so they know when they will be coming up. So the first one is Francisco Dobles-Reyes. So Paco, so I've actually known Paco a very long time. Paco, it's been nearly 20 years, I'm afraid to say. So he's the director of the Earth Sciences Department at the Barcelona Supercomputing Centre. We've worked together on various European Commission funded projects related to climate research, climate services. I think first we met in the Ensembles project under Framework Programme 6. So that's the first panellist. Second, Daniela Jacob, who I've known for the same amount of time. We also met in the Ensembles project. She's director of the Climate Service Centre in Germany and chair of the German Committee Future Earth. We've also worked together on other European projects since Ensembles. Thirdly, Roger Street, who I also know. So these first 3 I do know quite well. So he's research associate at the University of Oxford. We've worked closely together on climate service issues, particularly in the UK, but also wider in Europe, and also now a bit in Australia as well. So those 3 I do know well, and we're virtual. So unfortunately, I haven't actually, I don't think, met face to face the next 3, which is a shame. And if we were in Brussels, then I would do. So hopefully we will meet face to face in the future. But here we are in the virtual world. So firstly, Peter, Deputy Director of the Research Department at ECMWF, where he heads up the Scalability Programme. So hello, Peter. Nice to meet you virtually. Next will be Tom, Deputy Head of Unit at JRC in the Disaster Risk Management Team, part of the European Commission. Hello, Tom. And Petra, Head of NatCat Service at Climate and Public Sector Business at Munich Re. So hello to Petra. So those are the panellists which we will hear from. And I think some chat, I'm not going to be able to monitor the chat, but I think some instructions have been put in chat about how to raise questions for the panellists. So we'll start with some brief thoughts from them, maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes from each of them, giving some thoughts about topics related to this session based on their expertise. And then we'll have a reflection from each of the panelists very briefly on what they've heard from the others, and then we'll move into the full question and answer session after that. So that's the plan. Let's see how this goes. So far, so good. So first of all, if I can work out how to unshare my screen, we will move to Paco. And I do not know how to unshare my screen. Stop share. So Paco, over to you, and I will give you, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes, if that's okay.
That should be more than enough. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks to all the attendants for joining us. Let me share a few thoughts before we go into the discussion later, and I feel also a bit of responsibility of opening these interventions from my colleagues. So I hope that the material will be relevant. So as Chris said, I work at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and I wanted to talk about climate information for climate change adaptation. So I am a climate modeler. I work with global models, I develop them, and I use them. But somehow we are confronted by a changing landscape where digital is really growing in importance and in the provision of solutions. And one of the ideas that is being thrown at the research community is this idea of the digital twin. And I use here the example from the personalized medicine field, where they've been already developing this concept of digital twin for a while, where basically if you can see my mouse, I'll try to take a pointer. Okay, if you can see here a human that has been analyzed, it's been diagnosed from a disease that is being analyzed in a computer, compared with many other sources of information, and several in that computer. The digital twin is used to test in silico the different treatments for that person, and to select the treatment that could provide that person with the best results to alleviate his or her problems. And the advantage of this is that contrary to what we see in House, the series, the TV series, where the patient almost dies in every chapter, here we don't need to make the patient suffer that much. So somehow the computer is helping us to do this kind of thing. There are two interesting things here, in my opinion. The first one is the importance of having good models that allows us to provide relevant and usable information. The second one is that the whole idea starts from the user. So it's the patient, the one that is at the beginning of the problem definition. What is the situation in our field, in climate sciences? Let me move to the next one. So there are some barriers that prevent the use of climate information, and I list some of the barriers here: lack of awareness, difficult interpretation of the climate information that is being disseminated, and also the lack of synthesis. And somehow what is behind the information that is being made available in the public domain in particular is that there is a lack of correspondence between the quality of the information and the impact that is expected to have. A possible solution is to work along with the users to develop pieces of information that can be integrated in decision making, and this is part of what Climate Services is trying to do, and we'll hear a lot more about this in the next interventions. But I would like to build on one idea which is closer to my field, which is that before we reach the barrier of not having developed relevant information, what we also have to bear in mind is that the data sources that are used to generate that climate information need also to be of high quality. And in my opinion, this is not the case yet. And it's not the case yet because we are not taking seriously the problem of how difficult it is to generate relevant climate information of sufficient quality. And this is only one example out of many that when can obtain from the literature and also from the IPCC reports, where basically the quality of the data that are used or generated by climate models is limited by our capability to perform these experiments with enough complexity and with sufficient realism. And in spite of the, for instance, groundbreaking developments that have taken place in this case in decadal prediction from last year, when we could prove for the first time that there was a possibility for predicting the climate over Europe on timescales of several years into the future. The requirements to obtain this kind of information are huge, in the sense that they require massive amounts of computing time and models to reach the number of the ensemble sizes that are allowing us to extract the signal out of the massive amount of noise. There are ways to go around this, and it's to really work a bit more in this concept of the digital twin for climates. And in the same way as I mentioned before, for the personalized medicine digital twin, we can improve our models, the models that are used to make climate predictions and climate projections, by making use of the knowledge that we have gathered over the last few years that basically allow us to better represent the interactions between the ocean and the atmosphere, and represent better the processes that matter at the surface of the ocean. The requirement to do this is to have models that require also huge amounts of computing time, but that we expect to be much more realistic and much better than what we have had until now. However, and with a bit of humbleness, I would like to mention that until now, climate modelers like myself, we've had a tendency to ignore how much we can learn from social sciences, and how important the role of social sciences in the definition of climate modeling problems and the formulation of climate information can have. And somehow the importance for future work is to be aware that the whole purpose is not to have a wonderful model, but to have a model and the observations that are required for developing it that supports good decision making. And I would like to close with this mention to this book by Matt Brown, which is very recent, that somehow it's I think a really useful reading for people working on the physical aspects of climate science, because it's looking into what we need to do for our research and our developments towards the development of services to make everything that we are making available to society much more relevant, more trustworthy, and more usable. So somehow, starting from the fact that the reliance on bad models or not sufficiently good models as we have now leads to overconfidence, which will make us underestimate physical risk. The questions that matter in terms of physical risk need to be defined by those that know the most about them, and these are not climate modelers. So somehow the final words that I would like to say is that we need to work much closer together with the digital world, with everything that we have learned on the physical aspects, and with social and human sciences. Thanks, and back to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Paco. So great, you've already thrown us into climate science, climate models, climate services, decision makers, digital twins. That's fantastic, thank you. So moving on to Daniela, who I probably should have said at the beginning. Sorry, Daniela, she's involved in the EU mission on adaptation to climate change as well. So Daniela, looking forward to hearing your thoughts. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, and hello to everyone. Yeah, now let's see, do we really need what Paco just said, and why do we need it, and are all the data helping us at all? let me step back for a moment. When I started actually to work in the Climate Service Center Germany in 2009, our mission was to develop climate services for adaptation to climate change. And at that time, there were some representatives of public administration mentioning to me, do not talk too much about adaptation, please, because we could risk the efforts for mitigation of climate change. Times have changed quite a bit. We now have the second round of the European Adaptation Strategy. And if you have listened yesterday to the press release, it was very clear that now the word adaptation has changed its meaning a bit. So from adaptation to climatic changes more in terms of weather and climate variability, it now goes more and more towards adaptation to low carbon society, or adaptation to let's call it Paris lifestyle, of course relating to the Paris Agreement and keeping global warming well below 2 degrees. So how can we do this? Of course, we have to combine mitigation, adaptation, transformation, and sustainability. A few more words, Chris, in a way that we benefit from the new opportunities which Paco just mentioned with digitalization. So we have, on the one hand, the more technologically driven opportunities to better dig into data, knowledge, information, and hopefully transparent and public sources. On the other hand, we have made major steps forward to co-design, co-create, co-develop, co-evaluate with parts of the society our new information which we need, our products, our solutions, our services, in a way that we come a bit closer towards what I call the Paris lifestyle. Actually, not me, others are calling it Paris lifestyle. And in this, we all the time have, of course, to make decisions under uncertainty, but this is not new. I mean, this has been done since humans are on Earth, I would say. We always take decisions under uncertainty, and we did it in a way that we used our experience, the experience of the generations, the past generations, in our current settings. And that was how politicians took decisions over the last, let's say, decades or centuries. But now, since 10, 20 years or so, we have, in addition, knowledge about the future, about possible futures. So it's a new challenge now to bring together our experience from the past with the knowledge about possible futures. And how do you take a decision now with a new time frame? I think it's very important to understand that for this we need the data, we need the information which we have collected, we need scenarios in, as I said, transparent way for everyone at every point and everywhere in time and space, in order to bring it together in a new way with I would say, the knowledge which is carried in all parts of society. So the soft skills, the soft knowledge which we have, which is not so easy to simulate with the big digital twins. But this will then come up with hopefully meaningful knowledge to preserve our common goods and to bring us to a climate resilient Europe, which is also one of the major visions for the mission on adaptation to climate change and societal transformation. And in this, it's important to understand that we are talking about resilience to environmental systems. So do not harm the environmental systems. Which data do we need for this? Which strategies do we have to apply? How can we have resilience of social and economic systems in a way that we do not leave anyone behind, that we have cross-generation responsibility? Which data, which knowledge, which services do we need for this? And how can we actually turn the challenge of adaptation to climate change with this brilliant European strategy into an opportunity to make Europe more climate prepared, resilient, and just? And of course, we need enabling conditions for this. And one of those enabling conditions is what we talk about today, is utilize our digital world, utilize our technological capabilities. But I think it's important to understand what we really need, which kind of quality is needed for which question. We cannot wait for some scientific new endeavors and research, which will probably answer questions only in 20 years if decisions have to be taken in the next 2 years. So I think the dialogue about not only what kind of service do you need, or how can you best make use of our modeling activities, and how can we bring our climate knowledge forward to get more reliable models. That's not the only thing which we need to have in mind. It's important to understand that decisions will be taken soon, and that and what kind of certainty for which level of decision is really needed, and how can we build flexible ways in our adaptation way towards a kind of low carbon society and towards a Paris lifestyle. And with this, I leave you with lots of questions to be answered in the next 1.5 hours, hopefully.
Good, thank you very much, Daniela. This conversation is moving along very nicely, thank you. So now on to Roger. I should also mention, so Roger has been heavily involved, particularly with the EU's roadmap for climate services and climate adaptation platforms. So Roger, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'd like to consider with the participants here what the launch of the updated EU adaptation strategy means in the context of climate services and climate adaptation or knowledge platforms, just as you discussed. And in doing so, I actually like to begin by first looking at related initiatives introduced following the launch of the original EU adaptation strategy. These initiatives, the European Research and Innovation Roadmap for Climate Services, but also the overview of climate change adaptation platforms in Europe, that all were done and made available in 2015, were supportive of the EU evolving climate adaptation agenda, including as reflected in the EU adaptation strategy of 2013. In both cases, what was really interesting about these is they explored and challenged the quality, utility, and relevance these services and their delivery mechanisms were offering, and provided directions as to where and how involvements or improvements could be made through engagement. The intention was to engender the developments and engagement, such as the available climate services and their associated delivery not only remain fit for purpose, but also evolved along with and advanced their ability and use, their availability, I should say, and use to support adaptation. With the roadmap, rather than setting a definitive research and innovation agenda, what it intended to do was offer that framework to engender the discussions. And this is something along with what we just heard from Daniela, discussions among relevant actors and stakeholders, but also identify investments that would enable the development and use of climate services. Since its publication in 2013, the resulting discussions that have taken place and the research and innovation investments have enhanced the quality and quantity of climate services available. And to some degree, they enhance the quality of the use of that information. But there's been a number of subsequent reviews, 3 or 4 of them in fact, that have and shared perspectives on the state of these services and their use. And these have shown, in addition to the noted advances that we've heard about, there remain a number of areas where action is still needed, but also they've identified some emerging gaps. And these gaps are a result of the evolving needs and capabilities of decision makers. Some of the things that we know that they need to make decisions. They're increasing their capabilities, but we're also seeing the evolving sciences on which the climate services are based also developing, I should say. These suggest that there's a need to engender that dialogue that I think Daniela was getting at, or one aspect of that dialogue Daniela was getting at, on the nature and scope of these gaps and the potential investments to address them. What are the opportunities that exist so we can start addressing these, not only as Daniela said, not only in the next 20 years, but also now, and to take the actions that I think that we see in the EU adaptation strategy. The overview of climate change adaptation platforms in Europe recognized this increasing importance for all Europeans to have access to relevant, high-quality knowledge, evidence, and decision support resources. This was an European Environment Agency technical report, and it looked at the state of play of the web-based platforms that existed across Europe in 2015 and identified and explored challenges, reflections, and lessons learned that were critical to their success in inspiring, but also informing adaptation. It also showed that the dynamic and diverse nature of these knowledge platforms was critical to their success, but importantly, demonstrated the value of them working together as a community towards enhancing their individual and collective contributions to supporting adaptation. This is not only true, this was not only true in 2015, but it's true today. And we're seeing that the truth of this as these groups come together as a community to really work towards enhancing their contributions in their own countries, but across Europe and on globally. I believe that improving the knowledge and managing uncertainties with the aim of inspiring and supporting smarter adaptation requires fit-for-purpose climate services and climate adaptation or knowledge platforms. They're all about providing relevant, usable, legitimate, and credible knowledge and services that support the strategy, but also the broader EU climate policy agenda. That available has evolved and will continue to do so. As such, supportive knowledge and services need not only to keep pace, but advance and show foresight in these areas. It's obvious that the depth and breadth of demand for knowledge and services have changed over the past 6 years since the roadmap and the overview were made available, particularly with an increased focus on inspiring and supporting action, the greater emphasis on systems approaches, the evolving nature of the climate service market, and the need to consider and assess solutions that provide multiple benefits. But as I said earlier, also the sciences behind climate adaptation and the resulting knowledge and services have evolved, and foreseen research and innovation investments will continue to contribute to further knowledge and service developments. With all the above in mind, and this updated EU adaptation strategy, as well as with the broader EU climate policy and science agenda, I believe that this suggests that there's a need for an updated roadmap. One I suggested is based on a systematic assessment of remaining and emerging challenges and opportunities and the capabilities across the climate service community. Not just an updated document, but a roadmap supported by an appropriate updating process consistent with and capable of reflecting on the evolving demands and capabilities associated with realizing the strategy's long-term vision and the evolving nature of the sciences and knowledge. I suggest to you that such a process is consistent with the initial concept of the roadmap, providing a framework to engender that discussion among relevant actors and stakeholders, and to identify investments that would enable the development and use of relevant, usable, legitimate, and credible climate services that can support and inform adaptation and the other aspects of climate action. Back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you very much, Roger. Good, so moving on now to Peter. I guess we'll hear from you about various topics, perhaps Destination Earth, climate services. So over to you, Peter, the floor is yours. We can see your slides.
Thanks very much, Chris. That's good, thanks for that as well. Yes, I want to refer to a couple of things that the previous speakers have said, and there are actually opportunities to feed into better services in the next generation of models and services themselves. And that might be enabled by new digital technologies and is actually the basis for a European Commission activity called Destination Earth, which is expected to start mid this year and actually last throughout the entire multi-annual financial framework program. And that will be an enabler through digital technologies to do a couple of things better than today. So it should be seen as not as a replacement of existing systems, but as a booster for existing systems. So Destination Earth and the digital twins that it will use will promise three main areas of improvement. One is what Paco has mentioned for his decadal example, for example, is much more realistic models, a better convergence of simulations and observations to describe what we see out there, what we have seen in the past, what we see in the present, and what we expect for the future, with more reliability through more realistic systems. The second is a stricter and tighter link between what he has mentioned as well in his first introduction, between the Earth system, so the temperatures and rainfall amounts and wind speeds, with everything, all the sectors that rely on such information, and a rigorous treatment of uncertainties across all these sectors, because in the end, it's these sectors that decide about adaptation strategies. And the last one that is really, really important is that, and that's really about convenience. So the convenient access, even for non-experts, to everything that's out there via data, tools, and workflows. So much less of a linear flow of information between the scientists and the application sectors, but a much more interactive, connected, and intervention-based framework based on digital technologies. So we believe that these three areas of enhancement can really make a difference in terms of not only the primary generation quality and quantity, but also the way this information is accessed and translated. And this goes back to a couple of recent publications, I think, that pretty much tell the same message as this one, for example, whereby climate science should look really more into the socioeconomic aspects and questions, and drive its design choices according to the actual users and taker-uppers of that information. And the second is related to uncertainty. We have to accept that there's deep uncertainty in the way we formulate our Earth system science problem, because that's how it is, because we don't understand, observe, or simulate everything, but we need to kind of propagate that uncertainty also better into the application sectors that derive and feed on this information. Another recent publication that is really highly relevant, I believe, that came out in Nature Climate Change only 2 weeks ago, and that shows this deviation from the present kind of workflow on how data is produced and transmitted to impact sectors via services, as into something in the future that should actually turn that workflow upside down, where the impact sectors, that drive decision making and policy making, actually make design choices about how climate services should be set up, and how the Earth system information that's right now at the top should be driven by what these sectors actually require. So it's really a reversal of the setup of information, of data generation, and the translation of that data into information. And the last point is, with the digital twins, once Destination Earth is completed, we really want to see the users at the center of the attention, where somewhere you have a system, an engine that creates the information that represents the best possible representation of the Earth system, past, present, and future, and where lots of the complexity of generating this information in the first place is hidden away from the users, and the users can access and play with that information and add their level of information generation from that in a much more convenient way than today. So a lot of the complexity of the system is hidden away, and I think this is central to an effective uptake of the information. And there's a whole plethora of digital technologies that can actually help do that. And really, it requires a program like Destination Earth, funded by a new program in Europe called Digital Europe, to enable these digital technologies for that purpose. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good. Over now to Tom. Perhaps tell us about the JRC's disaster risk management and the risk data hub, amongst other things. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Tom de Vroeve. I work at the Joint Research Center. I'm sharing my screen here.
Yep, that's good.
couple of slides to illustrate a bit my talk. So the JRC is a boundary organization. We're both a scientific organization and we are part of the European Commission. So we have one leg in science and one leg in policy making. And this is really a bit the core of my message and my contribution, the need to have this transition very well. I talk about loss data, disaster loss data. And I start with the first point. Something that really drives or has driven the climate adaptation strategy that was released yesterday was this idea of non-action. What if we don't do anything? What are the results? And models really help for that. The PESETA study that was done in the JRC, collectively among many different disciplines and different sectors with many external partners, produce these big numbers, the numbers that can inspire people into action, into understanding why acting is better than not acting. The billions of euros that can be saved, the number of lives that can be saved. Now, this is one very important thing where science, if it is brought into policy, really can make a difference. And that's a bit what we aim at. Now, I come from the disaster risk world. In disaster risk, a number of years ago, there was already the realization that disaster losses are very important to create the narrative. We saw that the big numbers are important, but how do you come to these numbers? And losses are generated in the disaster itself, and it's a very complex process of a hazard interacting with exposure, with society, and their vulnerability. The narrative in the disaster risk world is, on the one hand, what you see on the left, understanding this risk. But on the other hand, it's also about the management of the risk, because you can avoid a lot of losses by having good processes, by being resilient, by preparing, by preventing. So it is not straightforward to predict losses if you have a very strong management there. So this is a key point to understand how, from understanding disasters and disaster risk management, we can contribute to this debate. Now, before the Paris Agreement, together with the Paris Agreement, there was the Sendai Agreement on disaster risk reduction, where loss data was put central as a thing to get right to progress. So we've worked on this for a long time as the JRC, but in a very collaborative way with member states, with experts and scientists to tackle this problem of getting better loss data to inform all the modeling and in the end the action. We are now at a point where yesterday the risk data hub was explicitly mentioned in the adaptation strategy. We think that's an excellent step forward to take this very seriously and to put it in a strategy to work all together on this with member states and with everyone to get this data right. On the one hand, for the left side, for prevention, for understanding this risk and for the modeling, not only hazards, but also vulnerability data and exposure data. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side, what the Risk Data Hub offers is this collected loss data that can be used by different communities, including for the Sendai, but also for climate change adaptation. It's a monumental effort that, because the data is collected during the disaster by local authorities, by local actors or national actors, but always local, and somehow must come in a format that is usable and that feeds the global debate. So that's a bit the challenge there. We have worked for these years on a data scheme that can help do that, some kind of standard. And I think this is a way forward to try to harmonize, to standardize better and better this type of data that can be pulled. How to do that? Well, one way is to kickstart it, be practical, be useful. And what we already now have in the Risk Data Hub is a collection of curated data, the best data that could be found from scientific organizations, from projects, from initiatives, to pull it together, massage it into something that makes sense together. Many on the risk side on the left, and many on the loss side on the right-hand side. So it's a process, it's already something that can be used to help others to contribute to this. And that is the final thing. So how to go forward? It is a collaborative effort. We're working with really many organizations. It's already useful for member states and local actors, but really we need the input, the engagement of everyone to make this a success. Here you see a couple of ongoing initiatives, lots of acronyms, lots of organizations involved, both on the central bank, agencies, member states, projects, etc. Because it is that complex to get all this data. So this is the beginning of a process. Now, in the next 7 years on the adaptation strategy, this will be a reference point in this area. And we as the Joint Research Center will really support this process to get this data and then make it available for all the other climate services that can build on this part. I highlighted on the top right one box where it talks about standardization or harmonization, or a process where the formal aspect of encoding loss data is being discussed. This hasn't started. This is an aspiration for which we, of course, will need the help of everyone, the public actors, the private actors in this field to get this right. But the sooner this is done, the easier it will be to channel all this effort into actually getting the data. So those are my remarks for now. I hope it sparks some debate, and happy to answer questions later. Over.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you. So on now to Petra. I guess we'll hear about some data and initiatives on climate loss and damage, and hopefully the Natural Catastrophe Service. Petra, the floor is yours. Hello.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to our discussion. So we have heard about a lot of data, and now we're coming to the backbone of the data, I would say. So I want to introduce you the Munich Re NatCat service. Munich Re's NatCat service is one of the most comprehensive database on natural catastrophes. We start with the event searching in the middle of the 70s and have a stable global database for each country worldwide from 1980 up to now. We can go back for all great disasters to 1950. And of course, we have around about 2,600 major historical events. We don't use it for analysis, but it's always nice to have this information inside the database, especially for the geophysical events. At the moment, we have 50,000 data sets inside. So you see, it's not really a huge database, but the effort for this, or the main issue, is the quality of the data. Munich Re NatCat service is not open for the public, but we work together with a lot of research communities, and also being part of the European Environmental Agency for a long time. And we are part of the indicator assessment. Maybe you know this, it's on a homepage on the website from the European Environmental Agency. Maybe you know our world map on natural catastrophe. We produce it every year. For last year, we have roundabout detected 210 billion US dollar loss for the overall losses, and insured 82 billion. What you can see on this map is always, on the first step, our really simple methodology. So we have 4 different event categories. from geophysical events, meteorological events, hydrological events, and climatological events. You can see also the different sizes of the events. So not each single event is a catastrophe, of course, not on a global scale. Last year, we detected around about 1,700 events. And after our loss estimation process, we have around about 950 events inside our statistics. What you also can see on the world map is more or less our key figures. So we are dealing with the number of events and number of fatalities. We make a loss estimation for the overall loss and for some events for the insured loss. Behind this methodology is really high sophisticated procedure coming from detecting the events. All events are geocoded in the database, of course, to make a loss estimation, to make inflation and normalization adjustments. And we try to get as much as possible on data for each single event. So I hope it works. Come on. Okay.
Can you see your next slide? Because we can't.
Yeah, I know. Now, you
Yes.
can see it now? Okay.
Yes.
So my second point on this presentation is to focus on the insurance or protection gap. Only for your information, you see the country clustered by property and casualty business in Europe, and of course we see a little bit division in Europe between the eastern part and the western part. But please notice this is really not in the focus of weather-related or climate-related events. It's really for the property and casualty business in Europe. Have a look to the overall and insured losses for Europe, and therefore I want to mention some points here. You see the green bars are the overall losses, and thereof it's the blue one. You see the part of the insurance loss for each single year. All figures are adjusted to inflation. And the first huge peak we see in 1990, and it comes from a winter storm series. Maybe all of us remember this. It was Vivian and Daria. Also in 1999, winter storm Lothar, Martin, and a big earthquake event in Greece. 2002, the next peak was the flood events in Europe and the winter storm Jeanette. And in 2013, the last bigger peak, we have the flood in Europe and a big hail storm event in Germany. And what I want to mention on this slide is that if we have this accumulation of bigger events or one really big event, the loss potential could be higher and reach 40 up to 50 billion US dollar loss. Sorry for this. Normally we have also the figures in euro, but this time in the year not. And if you have a look to the last year, couple of years, last years, you see we don't have really huge or big events. So that means that the normal loss distribution in a normal year reach from, I would say, 12 up to 20 billion US dollar for Europe, and nothing happened special. This is one figure I want to mention. And my last slide make some analysis and have a look to the protection gap for the European countries beginning in 1980 up to 2019 with our figures, and you see a little bit an upward trend with the protection gap, but it's rising really slow. And I also want to mention that the protection gap, or the insurance penetration, or what can the insurance industry do with all these events, is always depending on the lines of business and the insurance market and the situation in each single market. And the reduction of the protection gap is not only a potential business opportunity for insurance industry, it's more an offer for all possibilities to handle this situation for Europe. And also, it's my last point, the public-private partnership could help really protect the public asset, could protect critical infrastructure, and reduce the general vulnerability. So that's from my side, and sorry for the struggling with the technique. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for persevering. Thank you very much for that. So we've heard from all of the panelists now. So what we will do now is I will run through them all again. I'll start with Paco. I'll go through the same order and just ask for some very brief sort of reflections on what they've heard from the other panelists, and any sort of complementary or additional thoughts or views they want to raise based on what they've heard. And we'll run through this quite quickly, but this will then give the rest of you a chance to raise some questions. So I see, it depends, I think, probably on how you're joining. I'm on an app, so I can see a Q&A facility, and there are 2 questions in there. So please do post questions. If you have this button, it's on the bottom of my Zoom screen, sort of towards the right, it says Q&A. Please do put questions in there. So we have one from Peggy, one from Marina, and the one from Marina is starting to be answered. So please do post questions in there while you're listening to the panelists reflecting. If you can't see that, then try the chat function. Hopefully, if you're in a web browser, you should be able to access the chat function. And we will try and follow questions in that. It'll be more difficult to follow questions in the chat. But so just to reiterate, please, as you come up with questions, put them in the Q&A function if you can see that. If not, put them in the chat. I'm sorry, it's just there's a difference between the web browser, in my experience, and the app. So, Paco, to start with you, if there's anything very briefly you'd like to reflect on from what you've heard from the other speakers. I mean, so far we have covered all of the topics we were hoping to hear about. So we've heard about co-development and employment of climate services. We've heard about Destination Earth and digital twins and digital technologies. And we've heard about climate loss data and the risk data hub. So this is good. We're making good progress, but we have another hour to go. So it's an opportunity to have some reflections first from the panelists, and then also questions from the audience. And we have 120 people joining us. So this is fantastic. So Paco, do you have any brief reflections you'd like to make?
Very briefly, just to say that after listening to the different interventions, I have the feeling that given that climate adaptation is a very heterogeneous problem with many different actors coming together to design and implement solutions, there is a certain tension between the general and the particular. So we have a certain tendency to generalize solutions when, and this is what we try to do, for instance, in climate modeling, when actually the problems that society is confronted with are very particular. They are very heterogeneous, and it's somehow that I think the simile of if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is a bit the kind of situation that we seem to find ourselves. So we have really powerful hammers. They are not probably as good as we would like them to be, but we have to deal with nails and spanners and bolts and all sorts of things, and somehow that particularity is really a big challenge in the implementation of this climate adaptation strategy.
Good, thank you. Anything else before I move on? Paco, okay. Good, thank you. Daniela?
Yeah, thanks. I think what we see is that we made major progress, and I actually like Roger's idea to update the roadmap of climate services and really to analyze what are the remaining challenges. And I think one of the remaining challenges is to connect climate change adaptation to disaster risk reduction much more actively. And we could see this in the last two talks by Tom and Petra, that I think that the different approaches from the climate scenario side and from today's risk reduction side could benefit from each other if we would be in a much stronger, much more direct dialogue. And what I see there is, of course, again, the data side. And of course, I do not like the protected Munich Re database. I know it is protected, and I have to say this. But if you think back a little bit, and when I listen to all of you, we really have an inflation of knowledge hubs and data portals and websites, and still they are not all available, they are not all transparent, but for sure not everyone understands what the data mean in those knowledge hubs. So I think what is missing here is a strong focus on the human side. We need people to translate the data, to translate the products, to help using the products, to help to understand the graphics, to understand what it means, what you showed, Paco or Peter, what you showed. What does this graph tell me in my daily decision making? And I think there is a huge opportunity for a job market, and we haven't talked about that at all yet. So I think that's something which comes very clear here on this, I would say, heavy data biased panelist side.
Good, thank you. Just also to warn the panelists, so questions are now starting to appear on the Q&A part, so you may want to prepare yourselves to start to answer those questions as well. So I like this technology. Over to Roger. Any reflections from you, Roger?
Thanks very much, Chris. It's really interesting to listen to the other people talk, and hearing some of the points with respect to putting decision making at the focus, as the focus for this. And if we are providing knowledge and information to support decision making, then we have to put the decision maker right up front and start to decide on. So it's a number of you know, I've always said, that this information and the way we supply information should be decision driven and science informed rather than the other way around. And that came up very much in Peter's presentation. We've said this very much so. That dialogue and is also come out in one of the questions that came out that was out there is, how do we enhance that dialogue between the different sciences that are involved or should be involved in making knowledge and information available, relevant and usable. And I think that this is something that I think we need to spend a lot more time and a lot more effort on, is enhancing that dialogue, enhancing that collaboration. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. We do not have to reinvent this. We have to use the science that's being developed in other areas and bringing those forward as ways of enhancing the relevance. What Daniela just talked about, this translational science, is really important. I often find that the information that we have is available, and some of that did come out in the talks today, but it's just in ways that people can use it, and making that much more relevant and legitimate in the context of the decision makers is something that, again, we need to invest in. This is a difficult area for funders to get involved in. The most difficult thing to try to do is to try and find a funder that will fund the translational science, because it is not as seen as being a legitimate use of funding that has been directed towards research. And yet it is fundamental to making climate, to this knowledge and making smarter adaptation. So we will have to find ways of doing this. And so I'm very, very supportive of trying to see that and seeing how best we can make that happen. Because without that happening, I think we're going to be having the same discussion 5 years from now. And just saying, why isn't this science getting out there? And we need to find ways of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, over to you.
Chris, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm with the European Operational Weather Prediction Center, and I think it's probably worth looking at some of the analogies or lack of analogy between weather and climate prediction and what's done with the information. And I feel actually that weather, because just the way it's done and produced, or the weather information, the way it's done and produced and conveyed to the successive sectors and used by the public, is something that probably climate prediction and climate services can learn something from. I feel that the way we operationalize things, the way we transfer research into production, the way we link with civil protection or commercial users and private individuals about weather information, the way we use observational data and have our standards defined and our networks quite well established and organized. They're quite lean. They're quite fast because we work on critical time schedules and all these things. I think it's established quite well. And there's a lot of things to say where it's not well organized and where there are gaps, of course, but it seems to me that, given the plethora of climate models and services and service levels and databases and data sets that are out there for climate, I wonder if some of the operationalization that we have good experience with in weather can be translated to something more operational for climate, so that the system becomes more transparent and more agreed on and is not quite as scattered and difficult to organize as it is today.
Good, thank you. Yes, and then building on what you said a bit earlier, I think it links to what Paco and Daniela and Roger were saying as well around decision making, having that at the heart of this on weather services. Yes, they've probably been historically much more driven by the decision making, and perhaps climate services haven't. So linking it to decision making, knowledge, all of these topics. So thank you very much. On now to Tom.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting, all the different aspects that came now in the panel. I'd like to draw a parallel with the COVID crisis, the coronavirus crisis, which is often said is a problem that is a magnitude easier to solve than the climate change crisis. So if we consider it this way, what can we learn? Well, the COVID crisis is a very clear hazard that has ramifications in very unexpected ways, in a systemic way, in all sectors, and it cascades and it cascades. It's the same for the climate crisis. We have to really think systemic and really work out the consequences, not just the direct losses or the easy things. It's the cascading through the whole system that is still very much unknown, and that turns out, like the COVID crisis teaches us, much more important than the direct losses. So the systemic nature is something very, very important to do. The second thing there is the involvement of the people. If we want to go to the Paris lifestyle, it's not unlike the changes that we now need to see in the population for wearing masks, for adapting behavior, etc. Again, something that shows that it will be very difficult to do, and maybe there are lessons to be learned from the COVID crisis that we can take. And a third thing maybe is that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity where a lot of money is being made available that may already be used in adaptation. Well, if the building sector, for instance, is being redone, it can be redone for the temperature, for the isolation of buildings, but also for disaster proofing the buildings. So it's really an opportunity to take a jump ahead that may be informed by science and we cannot waste.
Yes, interesting. Thank you very much, Tom. And Petra?
Yes, it should be easier. So I want to come up to Daniela's point. I wrote down help to translate, and I like this idea very much because maybe it's one reason why Munich Green Netcat Service data and statistics and analysis are so popular, because there's, in the first step, it's really easy. We have a strict view into the past. We show what's going on, and I think it's necessary to translate all the scientific stuff into topics who the people can work with. For our topic, it's a little bit difficult because we often saw that the people say, okay, the slides of Munich Re, the increasing of losses and stuff like this is climate change, and we know it's completely not true. So it's a kind of education and dealing with these topics, and I won't mention this point. Another point I want to show you that we are involved in a data community with the European Environmental Agency for really nearly 1 decade, and we saw the progress each and every time with the member states. The sensibility for data, for collecting data, is rising and rising, and I think we really be on a good way, but it's takes so long time, and you need so many discussions to make the policymakers to be aware that something has to be spent into the data collection part. And the third one, I want to mention that believe me that the insurance industry don't push a button and got all the data from their contracts. And I hope and I see that the digitalization is rising also in the insurance industry, and I really believe that it's going better and better over the time, because to get really the main information, what's going on with the high frequency and low impact events on the insurance side, is quite complicated. And Munich Green Netcat Service focus on, or is driven by single events. Yeah, and the thing between frequent losses and single events, it's not easy. And for some aspects, we can give answers. For example, sea level rise. It's for our purpose not possible to fix the losses for sea level rise, because it's not one single event. It's a time period. This is difficult, and also, you know, the database is a global database. So if you focus on heat waves and the over mortality rate from coming from heat waves, it's quite easy to have the data for Europe and the US, of course, but for India or a country like or in Africa, it's not a easy thing to come up with this data. If you have this information in our database, it rises Germany to a very, very high affected country, and it's not true. So dealing with the data is sometimes great and sometimes a nightmare. So I want to mention this. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll finish with the word nightmare. That was unfortunate, but anyway, so thank you all to the panelists. We now do have quite a lot of questions in the Q&A function. So we will now try and work our way through these. We have about 3/4 of an hour left, so this is good. So over now to all of you out there, and let me see if I can work out how to do this. So I'm going to try and do them in roughly chronological order, but I see some of them have been answered, so this might be slightly messy, but certainly the first one. So Peggy Mishka, I don't know, Peggy, it might be, if you're able to, would you like to unmute and ask your question? And then if the panelists can think about who would be able to answer this. Peggy, are you still there? I don't know how, if I can check if Peggy Mishka is still online or not. There's 110 people. Peggy, are you there? You are still there, but okay. Ah, how do you unmute? Okay, let me try and unmute you. Can you talk now, Peggy? Can anyone from CMCC help me with the technology here? How do we allow Peggy to talk?
Unmute. Hi, hello everybody.
Hello.
Hello, excellent. You can hear me now?
Yes, thank
Super.
you. Please ask your question.
Excellent. So my question was, I asked two.
Yeah, let's start with your first one.
Put them up first one, yes, exactly. So I work a lot in the private sector as a background, a lot between technology and finance and infrastructure finance. And I've done also a PhD in energy system climate modeling. And I try to understand in Europe, where are currently initiatives besides Munich RE that are linking financial models and there the climate risk indicators and calculations and the climate science community models, which are from the structure very different as the Nature paper presented. So the question in short is, anybody in the room, in the panel, has some more concrete information on such partnerships that are here already there or coming up in Europe? Thank you.
I'll tell you what, Peggy, while you have the microphone, why do you not ask both of your questions and then we can take both of those with the panel.
Okay,
Sorry,
excellent.
Peggy. Okay, and now your second question, please.
Yes, the second question also relates to this topic. There's also in the finance sector a lot coming up on ESG ratings, environmental, social, government ratings for companies and also funds like pension funds, bonds. And now currently everything is green and climate branded. And the standards behind these assessments are still voluntary, and there are many, many standards. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of discussion about greenwashing as well. And same question here to the audience, to the panel. Are you aware of some recent research on this, on initiatives, on where to get closer to the scientific database news, what's going on in finance on ESG ratings and climate risk model information? Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. So normally we would be standing in a room and I would be able to look around at the panelists and they would wave at me saying, yes, please pass me the microphone. But obviously I can't do that now and I can only see 4 panelists on my screen. So we'll see how this goes. But while I'm doing this, hopefully the audience can also type in answers to the questions. So Peggy just mentioned that maybe others in the room beyond the panelists would know. So please do use the Q&A facility to also provide comments to other people's questions, but we'll use the panelists to actually verbally answer questions. So who would like to answer one or both of Peggy's questions first? And bear in mind, I can't necessarily see you. How can I see everybody? Right, I can see you all now. Would anybody like to take either of these questions? Okay, Peggy, you've asked a question.
Maybe I can
Tom?
offer some feedback here. To be honest, we don't link the models at the moment. This is definitely a very interesting thing. This is really where multidisciplinarity is so important, to break the barriers between physical modelers, economists, and social modelers. It's really, really a crucial area. A bit in the COVID area we did in the last year, because it's so important to link the impact, the cascading into the different sectors. But there are, in the context of the Risk Data Hub, dialogues going on with financial institutions. where it is about the data. It's about the lost data and having sufficient quality of lost data to be able to do that, to be able then to use it in modeling, merge these two worlds there. So I think there's some interesting work going on there. You're very welcome to contact us afterwards, and we can talk and see what kind of links we can make. But this link with the financial sector is happening, and we're very much encouraging that. Over.
Thank you, Tom. Roger? Roger? Your hand is up, Roger.
Yes, thank you very much. I just had to unmute. I don't have a specific answer, but I know that this has been a part of a discussion that's going on within the two areas that you might want to tap into. The first is that as part of the its second scoping forum, the JPI Climate convened a group of people that's the Joint Program Initiative on Climate, convened a number of people that were working in areas similar to this, and there was some discussion as part of that discussion that occurred just in the early December. But what the other is that there will be a discussion. This is part of the European Conference on Climate Adaptation. There will be a discussion that will include aspects of what you're just talking about, and that is currently being developed, and there'll be more information coming out very shortly, I hope, on, and there's a specific section or session that will be on this topic. And it will be a virtual conference. There will be a webinar that will be on this particular topic, or that include looking at the financial sector. And I think it would be useful for you to keep your eyes open for more information comes out about that in the next couple of, let's say, next week or two. But like I said, there'll be a webinar probably the latter part of May, early June on this topic in particular, and I would really hope that you would participate in that discussion and you'll hear more going on.
Thank you very much, Roger. Okay, and Hans has put an answer in the chat, which Peggy has seen, so there's some answers appearing in the chat as well as in the QA. I'm going to take the risk now of then dismissing Peggy's questions. I hope this doesn't delete them. Yeah, that works. Good. So next, Hans Sanderson, if you'd like to ask your question, please. Hans, are you there? Hans Sanderson? Ah, can he not unmute? Yep. Hi, Hans.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Good. Thanks very much for some nice presentations, and I already put my question into Daniela, and you know, I like your thoughts a lot. But my concern really is that there's no mentioning of transitional risks in the adaptation strategy, and there's no mentioning of low carbon economy transition in the adaptation strategy. So in fact, the way I read it now, the adaptation strategy focuses solely on physical risks. And as you mentioned, a huge risk that we have from climate change today really is the transitional risks. So a third of German GDP comes from car production. And, you know, 99% of those cars are fossil cars. So in this coming decade, you might lose a huge portion of that GDP. That's a significant transitional risk. How can climate services expand into also dealing with not only physical risk, but also transitional risk and supporting this transition in a meaningful way based on science? And could this in any way be built into both the adaptation mission and the adaptation strategy? Because in my view, it's completely missing right now. And I'm worried that we're not really backing up the scientific development to support this transition. Thanks.
Daniela, are you okay to take that one? We didn't hear you, you were muted, but we could see your face.
Yes. So I know, Hans, you asked me this question a few months ago. Similarly, I do not know much more about it, but I agree with you that in the European adaptation strategy, it is not that visible. That's why I was a bit surprised and excited when I listened to Timmermans' press release yesterday, and when he talked about the role to look at the at adaptation also from a mitigation point of view and vice versa. So so he actually connected it in his words yesterday. But it's not in writing, but I haven't read the entire document, I must admit. So when it comes to the mission, the discussion in the mission board on climate change, adaptation to climate change and societal transformation, there the transitional risk is, I would say, still a bit hidden, but it's there. And so I think the dialogues I had, for example, on the meetings with Austria this week and a few weeks ago, when we discuss with small and medium enterprises, with science and policy framing, there is a huge interest in bringing these topics together. And so I think now the challenge is, what is the role of the climate services? And I think we have to expand our climate service idea a little bit more. So there are natural expansions where, for example, it is on us to inform if the development of a wetland, which could be seen as a CO2 sink, is of any has a future or not in an area which might be drought prone or something like this. So there are these natural connections between the low carbon and the climate, more physical risk. But then there's also the question about what kind of new private jobs, private companies, opportunities are arising. So can we think about new materials? Can we think about new production lines which are more carbon neutral? Which so we have now the request from some of the big companies to their suppliers. I just heard it yesterday that small and medium enterprises have now been asked to produce carbon neutral, so that they can deliver their products to the next step in the production line, and how to do this. And I think there climate service is part of consultancy in a way that discussing is energy efficiency looked at, is the transformation to renewable energies looked at, is there a possibility to use hydropower? Can we look at the water management in a more efficient way to also inform if in water sparse times we can inform industry how to best use the gray water. So I mean there are connections which are probably not so obvious yet, because for the traditional climate service branch, where I think we can bring those two topics together and help companies, could be consultancies, but could help also large companies to build into their risk strategy the climate risk, in not only in terms of let's say weather extreme event risk in the supply chain, but also in terms of opportunities in changing their business model. And so I think that is something which we should try to enhance and to develop pathways and storylines for regions, for sectors, how or which opportunities and barriers certain changes will bring. So that I think that we really look at the entire service delivery more in a systemic way, and not go forward as we did before and say, these are the consultancies for climate mitigation, this is for energy efficiency, this is for water management, this is for climate services, this is for, I don't know, health services, and so on and so forth. And when it comes to the cities, and if you allow me, Chris, I will answer partly to Karen Nielsen's question, because I think that is a really nice example, because in cities we do see this already. We do see how we can connect the traditional climate service in about heat waves, about shadowing, about bringing in humidity into the cities, how this can be connected with a more sustainable lifestyle and with a transition of parts of the cities. And one point here is to bring in people who are feeling responsible to inform the individual citizen about the challenges and the win-win opportunities if they, for example, eat less meat today and then they're healthier in the future, and what else? I mean, there's so many opportunities. So, and I really think this courses for city planners, but it is very important when it comes to the material for housing and restoring and rebuilding, and not only for new houses, so that we get away from cement and the CO2 intensive parts. And I think this is part of climate service to inform the people about this. And second, I think we really need these kind of, we call it in German, Kümmerer, I would say caretaker or something like this. So it's a person, people who feel responsible for a part of a city, to bring together to feel a more, to bring back these kind of citizen engagement and citizen dialogues and citizen assemblies, which then can look into their area as an entire system which has adaptation and mitigation and sustainability and prosper life and justice in the same setting. My quick answer. And it's difficult, Hans. I don't know. Tell me how we should do it.
Thank you, Daniela. Tell us in the chat, Hans. We have quite a few other questions to get through. Does anybody else want to comment on Hans's question beyond what Daniela just said? On the panel, sorry, any other panelists? No, okay. Karine Nielsen, did Daniela fully answer your question, or would you like to pose your question slightly differently? I guess if you can come on and say yes or no, so I know whether to move on or to hear your question. Karine Nielsen. Hi, Karine.
Thank you very much for all the presentations. Very interesting to follow. I think Daniela really nicely answered a big part of the question I had, which was relating to what other mechanisms do you see now as extremely important to move the communication and the information that is piled up available to the citizens. But if you want to comment more, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody on the panel want to comment? Roger?
Thanks very much. Karen, this is a very interesting discussion, and I agree with what Daniela said. There's no silver bullet that works here. One of the things that we found, and I've seen be a very powerful tool, is actually having it's peer-to-peer discussions and engaging champions. We've seen this as examples very much in different parts of the world, where you have people that are moving in this area and having what is most valued are the discussions amongst with their peers, and finding out more. Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? I think we have to move away from this idea that adaptation is about doing something for 2050, 2030. Adaptation is doing something now, and it's people looking to do something now, but also recognizing that what they're doing is moving them towards what they're going to need to do for 2050 and beyond. It's very few people have money to invest, particularly in cities, in doing anything for in 2050. They have money to invest to get some benefits now, and there are people that are doing this. So that peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer sharing of knowledge is really important, and I think that's what we need to really focus on. Some of the storylines, some of the stories that have worked and why things have not worked. We need to be able to share those, and those are all part of climate services and sharing that knowledge. So I would see more moving in that direction and seeing opportunities of how we could build that capacity to share knowledge and to translate that information from one and to transfer that knowledge from one city to the next. Very useful.
Thank you, Roger. Tom?
Yes, also a quick comment on this. There's of course initiatives like the Covenant of Mayors and networks of cities where it is all about sharing experience and learning from each other. So for sure, those are very important, resilient cities, etc. But I also wanted to mention maybe the role of Earth observation. It is possible to, increasingly possible to have good knowledge from above, to use these technologies to look into cities, into urban heat islands, into greening of cities, and also monitoring this over time from the 80s more or less when satellites were launched all up to now. In the GRC, we have the global human settlement layer, which is a global layer of cities that's very detailed and looks at these things over time, so a whole time series that may be not only useful for seeing a particular city, but also seeing equivalent situations in other cities, so that you can identify in which other areas a particular solution may be useful. So this kind of global European data can be useful for this. We recently published the Atlas of the Human Planet, which has excellent examples of those things, and you may have a look at that.
Thank you, Tom. There's an aeroplane flying over my house. I hope you can all hear me okay. So thank you for that. I don't know if Peter or Paco wants to comment in a slightly different perspective in terms of the more digital twin idea. I don't know, like very high resolution, different detail, these sort of things. Paco or Peter, any slightly different thoughts on this? Carring's question.
I was precisely thinking about along these lines. So the question is formulated as well. There's a lot of knowledge, and how can we get all this knowledge from observations, models, and into city planners so that they can make better decisions? These kind of questions, I'd like to turn them around and see how can modelers and observationalists design better instruments and better networks and better models that can respond to the relevant questions, not just across that range of cities, but for specific cities that have particular problems. So somehow establishing that dialogue that somehow Roger was already referring to shouldn't be looked at only from the point of view of the city planner or the decision maker, but the other way around as well. So where do the observations and the modeling effort should focus to really do something that is relevant?
Which points at the digital twin capability that we would like to see? You know, you would like to have a generic tool set and an infrastructure that allows you to join simulations and models in an objective way, whether it's at global scale or at city scale, whether it's targeted at an air pollution event tomorrow or you know, something entirely different on climate scales. And if you have such a platform, you know, you would not need to be an observation expert or a simulation expert to actually do that and see how would you configure your observational network to optimally sample something in support of a specific question, you know, rather than taking what's there and, you know, and trying the best you can do. But you could actually answer questions in terms of optimization of simulation capabilities and observation capabilities for purpose A versus purpose B, you know. But that requires that generic kind of infrastructure that digital twins promise, you know. But of course, it must be in a tiered system, because obviously, if you're addressing climate time scale questions or climate scale questions as opposed to urban scale questions, you know, there's a whole universe between them. But that does not stand in the way of the generic nature of such tools.
Daniela?
Yeah, Peter, this of course brings me to another point, which I think for which it would be quite interesting to see if you think that digital twins could are of any use, and that's it. How do we monitor adaptation success or failure? So I think that's an area which we haven't really touched on yet here, not on this panel, but the question is, can we at all use the digital twins to figure out which indicators where and how should be monitored in order to be able to monitor the adaptation success? And I'm currently using the word adaptation in the terms of adaptation to physical risks. So not even that we have solved that problem. I mean, there are now studies on adaptation failure around on adaptation success and so on and so forth, and a lot of work that goes into governance issues. But the monitoring issue, I don't think we can monitor and evaluate this with our current monitoring or measuring systems at all. I mean, having 2 stations or 3 measuring temperature and precipitation in a city and have 25 satellites, I mean, this will not help us much. So
well, maybe it's actually not this evaluation or monitoring is actually not physics based, you know. So it may not be temperature what you need to look at, but something entirely different. Maybe power consumption in a city, or I don't know, traffic or anything else, you know, or water usage in agriculture. You know, that is not measurable by satellites ever. It's entirely different measures, you know, and some of them are not even accessible to you because they're privately owned by an energy company or somebody, you know. So apart from these kind of questions, how you access data, I think the first discussion has to be about metrics. You know, what the digital twin cannot answer the question of what the metric needs to be. You have to start defining from a policy standpoint or societal standpoint of what your metrics should be, and then we can discuss whether that kind of metric is accessible to a digital twin. You know, I think that, so it's not a question you can ask the digital twin framework. You know, the metrics is not what the digital twins make decisions about. It's something that is given by definition from the outside, and then we can tell you whether a digital twin has access to that kind of metric, and then we can discuss monitoring. You know, so but I think the metric itself needs to be defined here, maybe in this forum actually.
Tom?
Yes, thank you. Maybe I pick up on this point also on monitoring adaptation and success and failure. And one debate that's being had also more on the disaster risk side, but I think it's very interesting to exchange this, is the concept of resilient goals, is the concept of what do we want to be resilience again, or what is a successful resilience? And it's not 0 casualties and 0 losses. That's not feasible, but there is a need to have a debate, very large, to understand what is an acceptable resilience goal. If this is there, it's easier to monitor against it. Without it, it's very difficult to monitor whether you're successful or not, because you have not defined what success looks like. So this is outstanding. It's not solved, and it's definitely a challenge, not a scientific challenge. It's really a political challenge.
Thank you, Tom. Petra, how does this work in your world? I guess you might have a slightly different perspective on this, but in terms of resilience and what Tom was just talking about, how does this play out in Munich Re and in your world?
Yeah, in my world, we can see that maybe you noticed that the insurance industry want to go out of all, or let me say it's a 2 pathway for disabling and enabling, come up with new products and services, and also partnerships and cooperations, and on the disabling side, get out with the asset management in a de-investment. Okay, we take care of our own emissions, and also on the liability side. So it means coming up with new underwriting guidelines So coming from the insurance perspective to build up new products that take care of the new situation and the needs of our clients, and okay, we heard about a little bit of greenwashing, but I think it's completely the right direction to go to the asset side, the liability side, and also the CO2 emission side. So I think it's the direction is the right way, and it's going faster, and so I think it's it's worth.
Thank you. Okay, we have almost just under 15 minutes left. Let's move the conversation on. Francesca La Rosa, would you like to ask your question, please?
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I'm never sure that I'm still talking or not. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this. My question is more on the market aspects, since Daniela was touching briefly on them at the very beginning of the journey of the roadmap. So 5 years ago, the market was not there, or we can say that there were very few attempts of building a market, but the fully operational market was not there. What kind of tangible progresses do you see after 5 years? More than in terms of opportunities, I would like to understand in terms of sectors, real tangible progresses that were developed throughout the past 5 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Roger, I'm hoping you're going to want to jump in on this. Roger, any comments?
Yeah, it's interesting. And thanks, Chris, and thanks, Francesca. It's interesting to look at this in terms of if you think of one of the ultimate objectives of the roadmap was to grow the market. And you know, the market, as you say, there were elements of the market that were out there. I mean, I'd hate to say that there was a fully operational market, but there was bits and pieces of activities where there were suppliers and there were users, and you know, whether that you define that as a market or the building of a market or whatever. But there definitely is I'm seeing a much more greater organization of the market in terms of the interest in being involved and the interest in finding in being involved as a market. Starting to see that occurring, and more recently internationally, I'm starting to see it behaving more and more like a market. You have, of course, your big suppliers, the private sector's coming in very big in this area. They see this as, I can always remember someone getting up from one of the large companies in the first international conference on climate services, and as they walked out, they said, this is a multi-billion US dollar a year business and we're involved. So you're starting to see some of the big players coming in and wanting to help grow that market for their own purposes, their own advantages as well, but also starting to see that. So I'm pleased to see that that's the progress I'm starting to see. What's also happening is on the public sector is I'm starting to see you're starting to see them coming in and providing more services and more information that has greater relevance and greater usability than it did prior. And there's still a long way to go, but I think that we need to see that we're starting to see progress in that area. Where I'm not seeing progress, and I'd like to see more progress, is in terms of the collaboration with and amongst the different elements of the climate service market. And that includes the public and the private sector working much more effectively together. I'm hearing and seeing elements of that occurring, but I'd like to see in Europe, I'm not hearing it as much as I would like to hear it. And I think that's some of the things that, you know, if you look at look at the roadmap and look at how some of the challenge 2 areas is that those are the challenge 2 areas where we wanted to build the framework for the market, is where there has been less progress than I think that there needs to be. And I think that, you know, we now need to re-examine whether that progress is just due to a lack of effort, or it's maybe because it was ill-defined, and that's part of the dialogue that's needed to better understand how we could grow the market through a better use of the framework and building the infrastructure that's needed. I think that's where we need to focus more effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela.
Yeah, maybe in addition to Roger, thanks a lot. I see a downside in this market growth, and because for me, hand in hand with the growth of with the development of the market goes the education and the training for the providers, not only for the users, but for the climate service providers, for the developers, for the climate service consultants which are out there. And I do not see that yet. I still can't see a curricula for climate services. I cannot see a master for climate services or something like this. It is a few people who left the scientific field and went into the private business, or people do it just the way they can, without a certification, without accreditation, without quality assurance, without standards. So and with if the market would grow much more exponentially, we would run into a major problem, which we already are, because we see many services which are not the quality they could have been.
Thank you. As you know, Daniela, I fully agree. Thank you. Okay, any more comments on that question from the panel? Okay, I think Petra Mandashide, so thank you, Petra. I think you provided a comment relating to Peggy's question earlier on funding. EU just launched the 10 European partnerships, including on energy, as well as with 10 billion, I guess that's euros, co-fund for research and innovation with private sector. So thank you, Petra. I don't think that's a question. So if it's okay, I'll move us on to the next one. Roxanne Marshall, sorry if I've pronounced your name very poorly there. Roxanne, would you like to ask your question, by the look of it, to Tom?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. So my question is very dedicated to loss and damage data, and I would like to know what are your idea on the granularity of the required data collection, and who will be targeted, because we already know that the insurance and reinsurance industry has the data, but how it will be managed, and also according to the national natural hazard scheme, how it will be integrated. So thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, and I think we've worked a lot with data and other insurance companies, but also with Mia. Mia asked a question also. Sorry, Mia, I answered it and it went directly to the answered column in the thing, so you couldn't ask your question live. But maybe I'll take it together that no, the Norwegian example is very good, and it's one of those examples where public and private work together very well with common objectives, and then try to do it the collection in a single way and share the data among each other. Those are good examples that can be shared with other countries. What we learned is that it's different in every country, so it's really up to the country or regions to identify what the best way is to collect loss data that matches with the mandates, with the regulations, etc. Some of these may be changed, and that's why it's good to try to harmonize things, try to think about ways that work and that can be replicated everywhere. But the basic granularity would always be an event, an individual event, and I think most loss databases start from that one event that happens somewhere, and the losses materialize either there or a bit further, and you try to capture all these elements. It gets extremely complex. The data model can easily get very, very complex, but then we try to align it with the practicalities so that it can be used, implemented in practical ways, either in local context or national context, also linking it to existing initiatives at UN level, for instance. In the Sendai framework, they're working hard on the desinventar model. These should be linked. And so we have good documentation on that. If you're interested on our disaster risk management knowledge center, there's a lot of publications on this topic. Over.
Thank you, Tom. We have a few minutes left and there are, I think, 2 more questions. Let's see if we can get through these. So Michael Stahl-Eggen. Again, apologies for my pronunciation. Michael, would you like to ask your question to the panel?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. This is my first, the first time I'm joining a panel or a forum like this to listen, and there's a lot of interesting information to gain from this. I have a question that is related to kind of practical consequences. For instance, the U.S. Treasury has said that they would start supporting climate stress testing on financial firms. But they also did not go, in my mind, didn't go far enough with that, because there's no stick or no carrot associated. I mean, it's a good first step to get an overview of how things seem to be playing out. But there will, you know, I'm kind of missing conclusions that will have impact on reserve requirements or dividend payouts or things like that on financial firms. And I'm since this is my first time in this forum, I'm kind of curious to gauge from you, some of you guys, what is the status in Europe? Have you had similar discussions? Has there have been held similar discussions with financial firms and regulatory authorities as to putting something tangible in place to kind of support the journey towards maybe more a better pricing of the risk that's inherent with climate risk?
Thank you. I can see some parallels to the first question, so the panel may or may not know. Does anybody on the panel, maybe Petra or Tom, I'm not sure who knows anything about this? I don't. Does it, Petra?
Yeah, maybe I hope I catch the main point of the question. We have in the insurance or finance industry, you have several measurements to handle this topic, and for example, Munich Re has of course some products to offer our clients, for example, the climate risk score and stuff like this, and the data management part, to come up with more detailed information to help the companies to focus on their risk. But it's not, let me say, it's very, or it depends very on the business model you have as a company. Yeah, and it's not so easy to switch over the time or immediately to other things. It's in the finance industry, it's easier. If you're a car builder, it's quite difficult and much more complex. So yeah, I see a little bit a challenge to get on this point. I hope that helps a little bit, because yeah,
okay, well,
it's not my core business. So.
Thank you, Petra. Does anybody else have a comment? No. Okay, good. So thank you. I see Tom has answered the other question in the chat. So if anybody else would like to answer any of those other questions, please do. We are sadly out of time, but thank you very much. So particularly thank you to the panelists. They're probably exhausted now, but thank you all very much. It's a strange world where we sit at our computers and do this, and it's tiring in quite different ways. I know we don't travel, but thank you all very much. Thank you to all of the participants out there. We had a lot of people join, so thank you very much, and thank you for all of the questions. I'm not sure if we fully answered all of them, but hopefully there were lots of good answers. I will close here. Thank you all very much. I hope you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. And I do hope I meet many of you at some point, maybe later this year or maybe next year, but sometime soon. So thank you all very much and goodbye.